All right, welcome back. It's time for Lightning Talks. Our first speaker is Sashko Stubailo, who's a core dev here at Meteor.
Cool. I want to tell you guys about a new project that I'm starting on. I've been working on it for about 2 weeks now with the help of Tom Coleman, who's one of the co-authors of Discover Meteor. I don't know if you guys have, I'm wearing a t-shirt, so that's kind of cool. So Tom Coleman and I are working on this project now, so it's going to be great. So today, what you get when you download Meteor is essentially a toolbox. If you go to docs.meteor.com, it's like looking into a giant box where there's all these different kinds of tools. You know, there's methods, there's subscriptions, there's some email package, all this different stuff. And it basically becomes up to you. How are you supposed to put all that stuff together to make a working app? You know, it would be like if somebody gave you a giant bag of power tools, a bunch of sheets of metal, and they asked you to build a car. You know, what it doesn't tell you that a car usually has 4 wheels, like which direction they point, like how many people are supposed to be able to sit in the car, stuff like that. So that's the part that we've been missing so far. There's a lot of different ways that you might learn about Meteor today. One of the things, like I mentioned, is Discover Meteor, which is a great book, and it takes you from some of your first steps with Meteor up to building a pretty great app. There's Stack Overflow, which is great if you have specific questions. There's a lot of community blogs and different websites that give you different tips. If you run into this problem, here's what you might do. And then all-powerful Google is just like any question can be answered. And then there's also some official resources. So there's the docs, like I said, but those just give you a bunch of different tools you can use. There's a GitHub wiki, but it's just a couple of articles. It's kind of like our version of the blog. There's package readmes. Those are hard to find. There's the blog, also hard to find things on there. Basically, the point is you can learn a lot about different individual things, different tools you can use with Meteor, but there's not one place where you can learn about everything in a way that actually tells you about what you're trying to do. And so that's the point. The point about the Meteor guide is to encode what is like the Meteor way of building an app. And this is, if you guys used to use Rails, this is a play on the Rails way, which is back when I was building apps with Rails. It was great to be able to Google basically anything and figure out this is the official way that people do it all the time. There's not 17,000 different ways to do everything in Rails. So we hope that the Meteor guide could be one place where you learn about Meteor best practices in a form that's easy to reference. So it's not a book where you go from start to finish, but it's a series of articles, as I'll mention in a second, that tell you about different topics that you might be interested in. The other problem we're trying to solve is that the knowledge that all the best users in Meteor have, the people who are running Meteor in production, scaling it to 200,000 users, building all these cool apps that you can read about on our website, there's not a place where all that knowledge is centralized, right? They post it on their blogs, they post it in answers on Stack Overflow or Quora, but everyone ends up reinventing the wheel because there's not a place where it's all centralized. And from my point of view, and from the point of view of people who are building packages for Meteor, other extensions, submit pull requests, it's not always clear where the gaps in the framework are. Like if you were going to set out tomorrow and build a great package for Meteor, where's the place you could target to hit the most number of people and solve most people's problems? This is a problem I have every day because basically all I do all day is build packages for Meteor. So the answer is the Meteor guide. So you can check it out on GitHub. We're trying to develop everything in the open in a repository, helpfully named guide. So basically, we're doing all of our discussion, all of our communication on this repository, me and Tom Coleman, and lots of different people from the community. So the outline of the thing is like this. Here are some of the 16 articles that we're planning on having in the first version. There's a lot of kind of greatest hits of Meteor questions on here, right? Some highlights would include forms, right? How are you supposed to do forms in Meteor? Well, there's autoform, so that's a great start, but it's been a big question in my mind ever since I started here. Things like, what's the proper way to test every part of your thing? Velocity has some great guides. A lot of people have written great blog posts, but it'd be great if you could just read this and then do what it says and you'd be done. Even stuff about how to debug your app, right? We have some great tools for that, like Meteor Debug, Meteor Shell, but it can be pretty hard to find them if you're just starting out, even though they're such crucial tools. So if you don't think that something is on here that you want to have, you should go to the previously mentioned GitHub repository and post an issue and tell us that you want that article. So the plan for the initial version of the guide is to have 5 stages for each of the 16 articles. So the first stage, which we're basically kind of done with at this point, is what we're calling ideation. It's where we just have an open discussion. We mentioned a bunch of package authors on GitHub, pinged them in their notifications, and we're like, hey, like Sam Hatum, what do you think about testing? Like Josh Owens, where's your security outline so we can integrate into this thing? Now we're finishing up the second stage, which is outlines, which is going to basically, we're outlining every single point that we want to cover in each of the articles. So again, you could go on GitHub today and look at the outlines and see if there's something we're missing, like some big question you've always had about Meteor that you think should be in the documentation but isn't. Now is the great time to tell us that it's in there. Next, we're going to build some example apps and example code that we think will encode all of the best practices that we've learned about. And then we'll actually write all the text and have a cool set of articles. And then, the part after that, which we haven't quite figured out yet, is how we're going to maintain the thing. But that is also a very important aspect of this project. And we can't do it without you. So I encourage you to go and help us on GitHub. That is the wrong URL, but that's the URL for the Meteor framework. But if you go to meteor/guide, you'll be able to see all of these issues, all of their statuses, and all of the comments of people discussing this stuff. So I hope you guys can come, help us, and tell us what you want, and tell us what you've learned about Meteor in the past 3 years so that we can write it down. Thanks.
Any questions?
Questions? Comments? Suggestions?
Are those 16, those aren't written yet?
The question is, are these 16 articles written yet? They're not written in the classical sense of written, but are... You're like, what other sense is there? I'm going to tell you in a second. At first, I was thinking that we would write each one individually, but I think after talking with a bunch of people, it turns out that it might be better to do all of them incrementally. So start out with coming up with all the ideas, then all of the outlines, then everything, to make sure that they can all be self-consistent. Because there's definitely a danger if we were to write one all the way through, and then we were writing a different article, and we would be like, oh no, like there's no way to make these work together. So right now, all of these articles have all the ideas written down, and about half of them now have like first draft outlines, which will become final unless somebody thinks that something should be changed. Yeah, so this is a suggestion, just to repeat your thing, that saying that an article like this is final is a bit of a stretch because best practices for building apps are always changing. And I think that's a very important point, which is something that we're going to have to figure out how to maintain, right? Like even books get out of date, stuff like that happens. I think part of the goal of these articles is to keep them, first of all, keep them up to date enough so that they can be kind of like the embodiment of the Meteor framework. So it's kind of the thing that we're always thinking of when we're designing new APIs or changing the way some internals work. They should drive towards improving these 16 things that you can do with the framework, because we've never written down like what are you even supposed to be able to do with this thing. We just wrote a bunch of stuff. So that's one thing that I think will help keep it up to date, is that these are actually might be the things that inform what we do with the framework in the future. And the other thing, which is to temper that a little bit, is not everyone wants to be doing the most cutting edge thing all the time. For people who are looking to find out like some cutting edge stuff, like the blogs, the forums, all the discussions are probably the best place to go, because that's where like all the new stuff is come up with. And then once somebody agrees, or like a lot of people agree that they need to switch to some new thing, that's when we would put it in here. This isn't like about leading the charge. It's about writing down the things that a lot of people know already. There's not a good way to share all of it.
Smaller examples.
Yeah, so the question is there going to be one giant example app that ties together all of these articles? Are there going to be several different example apps? Like, what are you building when you're reading about all these articles? I think from one point of view, like, having an example app is super important, because otherwise, how do you know that these things are all real? On the other hand, having a single example app, it means that either that example app has to be super contrived to hit all of these points and all the different ways of doing things, or it means you have to have a lot of different example apps, and then it'll be hard to keep them all up to date. I think we're going to try to hit some intermediate stage where we're going to make sure that all of our example apps actually follow this advice, right? So like to-dos, like the local market thing, whatever other example apps we build in the future are going to embody these principles, but we also might have some things that are like floating in space as just separate code samples. Because I think like whatever would be blocking us from making it easy to update this document would be like a bad thing to have, kind of. And like having too much example code that tries to cover all these things means like every time we change something, we'll have to like update a lot of different stuff. So I think we have to strike a good balance there. So the short answer is we'll have example apps, but they probably won't cover every single point in the entire thing. And actually, it will be a great opportunity for other people to write example apps that cover the things that we didn't cover. So that'd be cool as well. Cool. Anything else? All right. Thanks. Thanks for listening.